Good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here tonight. So happy to see this outcome of all these citizens and members of our community, so thank you for being here. This evening, we're going to have a discussion. We have public health experts and state legislatures here for an important conversation about proposed legalization of non-medical marijuana and the serious implications this decision would have on our youth. We will hear from our speakers tonight until approximately 8 p.m., and then we will open for questions and discussions for our final half hour for the night. This is being recorded, and the mic is up here, so if anybody does have a question at the end or have something to say, please, maybe we'll make a lineup alongside here. Lisa and I will try and keep that orderly, and you're welcome to come up and have something to say, if you have something to say. Tonight's forum is sponsored by Guilford Day. Lisa and I co-chaired Guilford Day, and we have some youth leaders in the community. Also up at the panel, up at the table here on the panel, we have one of our youth leaders, Gabby Palumbo. And Clinton Partners in Community, and Made in Madison, yes. So we have three entities. We have Guilford Day, we have Made in Madison, and Clinton Partners in the Community are all the sponsors for this evening's event. Tonight, I'd like to introduce Senator Ed Meyer.
Thank you, Peter. We're in quite a battle in the country about marijuana, and you're going to hear a lot more about it tonight, and particularly the science about it. But we're going to start off by hearing from our state legislators who are going to tell us the legislative scene in Hartford, a great battleground in our state. And our first legislator will be our distinguished state senator, Ted Kennedy. Ted is in his second term in the state Senate. He is head of the chair of the Environment Committee. He's also on the All-Critical Public Health Committee, and this bill will probably pass through that committee as well. So with great pleasure, I introduced my successor, Ted Kennedy.
Thank you, Senator Meyer. Can everybody hear me okay? Good. I think I'm going to, Vin and my colleague Sean and I are going to sit here for our legislative presentation, and then I'm anxious, like many of you, to listen and to learn from the experts who are here tonight, the scientific experts, about what we need to know about marijuana and the harm that is posed by marijuana, and to take kind of a step back and try to analyze the data and the evidence about this drug. So, first, I think it's great to see so many people in this room tonight. As Ed has said, this is an issue, the legalization of marijuana is an issue that's sweeping the country. It started a relatively short time ago, politically speaking, but certainly in the last election, in the places where legalization of marijuana has been on the ballot, it's passed overwhelmingly. And my view is that we need to halt the widespread adoption of legalization laws in the United States, to listen and to learn and understand what have been the experience of other states. I think I think many states have just rushed to judgment, all honesty, into this. This has been portrayed as a harmless drug. It's been portrayed as a financial savior for many states. There's no doubting the evidence that it is returning a tremendous cash infusion in states that have legalized it. But to me, the people around the country who are touting this as some sort of financial savior for this predicament that we find ourselves in the state is just a wrong policy. We should not be trying to solve our financial problems of our state by expanding and taxing the use of marijuana. That is not a good strategy for the future of the state of Connecticut, in my opinion. I am here to listen to the experts to see, what is known and what is unknown. It's really is remarkable that a lot is just not known about the long-term impacts, the impacts of the developing brain. Hopefully, what I've just said is wrong, but maybe our experts here will counter that. But I have always believed that we need to make decisions as legislators, not based on emotion. There's a lot of emotion around this issue, but based on scientific evidence. And I just don't think, personally, it's a good idea to legalize a substance that we know will be, you can see the experience in other states, for example, where now it's, the use among school kids and others in society have just increased dramatically simply because people have just said that, well, the states have made a determination that there's nothing wrong with this drug. And of course, do we really, the overall question that I think we really need to, ask ourselves here in Connecticut is, do we want, a stoner population? Is that a good idea for the state of Connecticut? And I don't think that is a good idea. I think marijuana is, fairly readily available, as far as I can tell. I'm not sitting here trying to criminalize marijuana. I should just say, I do think that, we should decriminalize this drug because we don't want our young people walking around with a criminal record for possession of a small amount of marijuana. I do not think that is a good idea, but I think it's important as we discuss this, the difference between decriminalization and legalization. Because just if you are like me, in favor of decriminalizing this drug, meaning you're not going to be able to arrest people, you're not be able to arrest our young people, so they go the rest of their lives with a criminal record, which does no one any good, in my view. That's not to say that I'm also in favor of legalizing this and make it so you could walk down the streets of Guilford and as you're going shopping at Page's Hardware, walk into a store and purchase marijuana. I don't think that that's the answer to our state, and I don't think that's the answer for for our future of our citizens. So I thank you very much for asking me to come tonight. Again, I'm going to speak here, but then join you in the audience so I can see the presentation that the experts that have been assembled are going to show us tonight. So thank you very much for having me. I do know that the legalization bill has been referred to the Public Health Committee. I serve on the Public Health Committee, so we will take that up. I think, honestly, that the legislative future of this proposal is really uncertain because even though I think, it passed, overwhelmingly in Massachusetts and whatnot, I don't think you can take what's happened in other parts of the country and just suppose that this is going to somehow fly out of the legislature. I think there are many people like me that have some serious questions about this type of proposal. So anyway, that's all I'll have to say for now. I'm interested in hearing what my two colleagues have to say about it, because honestly, I haven't really talked to my colleagues about this. We're dealing with a lot of different issues, and because I think it does have some proponents. I'm not going to lie about that. You read the newspaper, you know that many people have proposed this. But I do think that there are a lot of people like ourselves that have some serious questions about diving in and rushing into this legalization movement for Connecticut.
Okay. Thank you, Ted. Well said. The Guilford Day group has really been terrific in our town for some years now, and it's led by Bo Hune, who's here, Peter, who spoke, and Lisa. And will you, three of you stand up and get acknowledged for your leadership? You're terrific. Our next legislator is Vincent Candelora. Vinny has got a very significant position in Hartford. He's a member of the Finance Committee, which deals with our taxes. He's also the deputy leader of the Republican caucus, a major leadership position in Hartford. He represents an interesting district that includes all of the town of North Branford and then parts of the towns of Guilford, Durham, and Wallingford. So with great pleasure, I introduce to you Representative Vincent Candelora.
Thank you, Senator. And I also want to thank Guilford Day, and I can't even guess all these names, but I guess Maida Madison and Clinton Partners for putting this event on. I think it's an important issue, and I think education is the most important piece right now in the discussion of marijuana. I entered the Assembly in 2007 when we were debating whether or not to allow for medical marijuana. I opposed the legislation all the way through until 2011, I think. It was finally passed into law. I had voted against the legislation because I was concerned about the way it's structured and how people can self-prescribe, essentially, to certain illnesses that the state deems appropriate to treat with marijuana, and then those individuals are given up to 2 ounces a month, and they could just take as much as they want or as little as they want. Subsequently, we had a bill that now puts forth research behind the medical marijuana. So we can now partnership with our universities to try to ascertain what benefits are there, if there are any medicinal benefits to marijuana. And that was legislation that I actually did support, and I think we should have done that first. Because my concern today, where we are right now, is we are seeing an erosion, I think, of perception of what marijuana is and what the effects are. And what I find is the older generations and my generations who saw it in the 60s, 70s, and 80s perceive marijuana very differently than what it is today. The THC levels are triple what they were when I was going to school. The exposure, as you'll hear tonight, has much more dramatic effects, I think, on our youth than it might have 30 years ago. And so I continue to oppose the legislation, certainly to make it recreational. I think Senator Kennedy pointed out a very good distinction. Connecticut, and I think it was also in 2011, changed the law and decriminalized marijuana. So if a person's in possession of small amounts, I think it's under a half ounce.
Half ounce.
That you're going to get an infraction. You're not going to see any type of jail time. And I think that was an important piece of legislation to put forth. But coupled with the debate now of decriminalizing and making marijuana medicinal has caused a problem in particular with our youth. And so this forum to me is critically important to get the information out there to people. Because after the legislation was passed, what struck me is I think my son was about 12 years old at the time, and I'm driving him to school one day and he refers to marijuana as medical marijuana. And even today as we talk about the drug, he does tell me he's seeing more and more kids smoking it because the perception is it's no big deal. They talk about it at home now in front of me in the sense that sometimes they sort of joke about it, that it's sort of a funny thing, people are smoking it for certain illnesses. And while there could be medicinal value to it, the reality is that there also is a dangerous component to marijuana that we think we all need to learn about. I do think we need to wait to see what Colorado does and what those impacts are. I think that information is sort of being suppressed at times. But I look at even California back when they put their laws into place, you saw municipalities scrambling to try to put the genie back on the bottle and try to regulate it because it wasn't the nirvana and the sort of benign drug that they thought it would be. It did cause troubles. And I just want to finally remark, it's not an easy road opposing this issue. Because, like I said, when you do a poll, a lot of people will say, I guess they say up to 60% say, yeah, legalize it. It's interesting, though, when Massachusetts came out and actually voted, it was a 4-point spread. I think it was 52-48. Because I do think when people are educated and understand the difference between decriminalization and making it available for recreational use, it's two different discussions. And that's, I think, what we need to continue to focus on. But one of the points that I've always been accused of is being in the pocket of the pharmaceutical companies. Because somehow there's a belief that pharmaceutical companies are opposing the recreational marijuana because somehow marijuana is going to compete with that medicine. And I have to say, being in the legislature for the last 10 years, I have not seen a dime of the pharmaceutical companies actually fighting it. I hear from the substance abuse communities, the youth and family service communities, the people that are in the trenches and exposed. And in fact, it really doesn't impact the pharmaceutical companies. What I do see is big money coming in from the marijuana industry that are put into Connecticut to try to make this drug legal. And I think that's something we all should be concerned with, because just going back to the way tobacco was developed, back through the 20s and 30s, and what we've dealt with, and I think we've done a good job to reduce the use of tobacco. That infusion of money back in those days helped promote that drug, and it was a very dangerous thing for our society at this point, we come to know. And I think marijuana is taking the same path. And so I think it is important to continue to oppose it, not because, we just want to be against, be against or for prohibition or whatever. It's just not a drug, I think, that's another addictive substance that we should be adding into our community stream. And so with that, I will continue. I'm on the Public Health Committee, and I'm also on the Judiciary Committee. So it very likely will come before one of the two committees that I'm serving on. And I'm just happy to have experts here to help tell us in detail more about what the effects of marijuana have on our youth. Thank you.
Thank you, Benny. Well said. Our last cleanup hitter in the legislature is Representative Sean Scanlon. Sean is in his second term representing Guilford and parts of Branford. He has the unusual honor of being made a chairman of a committee in his second term. Sean is chairman of the Insurance and Real Estate Committee and all the responsibility that goes with that. He also is very interested in the subject of marijuana. He and I have talked about it at some length. Great pleasure I introduce you, Representative Sean Scanlon.
I don't know about the cleanup hitter thing, but I'm going to do my best to keep it brief, because I know we have an exciting panel, and then people most importantly want to ask questions and have a dialogue. So at the risk of repeating what my friends to my right have said so far, I'll just say this. I have deep reservations about legalization. And I feel that, as Ted and Vin had said, it's important for us, I think, to have a conversation about that, not in the context of money. Because I feel very strongly, whether it's talking about legalizing marijuana, putting tolls back on our roads, doing things to raise revenue to get rid of this budget, I think we should not be having those things in the context of just the hole that we have, but in the policy of what we want to do going forward as a state. If you're down on your luck and you're out of money, people probably wouldn't advise you to go to a casino and put it all on black. And I think that this is very analogous to that, in the sense that we're possibly making some pretty serious decisions just in the context of the bad budget cycle that we're currently in. Again, not to be repetitive, but I would just repeat three sort of things that I really feel personally that we have to take into consideration here. Number one, if you've ever read anything about me in the 2 years that I've had this gig, you probably know that I've spent the most amount of my time on the opioid crisis that we have here in Connecticut. Last year, the numbers have not come out yet. We lost 900 people in our state of 3 million people to overdoses. That's up about 150 people over what it was the prior year. And when you look at these numbers, we're not talking about people that you would normally assume to be the stereotypical drug users. We're talking about valedictorians and high school star athletes who literally went from being the top of their class and the top of their sports to slowly and very quickly after that becoming addicted to these very powerful drugs. I went to Guilford High School. I graduated in 2004. I'm one of the youngest members of the state legislature. I know a lot of people who smoke marijuana. And as a younger person, I have a lot of conversations about this with my friends and my peers. And what I would tell you is that there's science when it comes to whether it's a gateway drug or not is something that's often mocked. I don't have the statistics. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a professor. I don't know that. I have hard evidence of friends of mine who started off smoking marijuana very innocently, have a couple joints, take a couple shots, drink a couple beers, and the next thing you know, not all of them, might not be a gateway drug for every single one of us, but some of them it can be. And so in the context of an epidemic that now takes more lives in Connecticut than car accidents and gun violence combined, I think we have to be very wary of what we're doing in terms of legalization of marijuana. The second point that has been mentioned is about the decriminalization. I am a strong proponent of the fact that nowhere in this state should we be penalizing people for low-level drug possession, because most of the time, the people who are caught and arrested and given records are people of color, to be honest with you. And I think the last thing we need in Connecticut is to have a generation of people who have a criminal record because when they were 16, 17, 18, 19 years old, they got stopped by the police, had a few joints on them, and then have a criminal record that is going to inhibit the rest of their life to be able to get a job, get a mortgage, do all the kind of things that we want people to do to be successful in their life. Half an ounce is the current law. If you possess under half an ounce, you get the equivalent of a speeding ticket for $150. Massachusetts, the state to our north, just legalized possession less than 1 ounce. 1 ounce of marijuana, if you're not familiar with it, is quite a bit of marijuana. And if you have half an ounce currently in Connecticut, you're getting the equivalent of a speeding ticket, which I support. I support decriminalizing it. So the question then becomes is, well, if the law right now decriminalizes to the point that most people that are casual marijuana users are not going to face any serious legal repercussions for possession, why legalize? The third and final thing that I would say is that, unlike some people in this room that may disagree with me on this, I do think that marijuana has a purpose. And I think that medical marijuana definitely has a purpose. And I've helped people as a state representative, people who have serious ailments, people who are chronically ill, people who call me up and they're 85 years old and they say, my husband is dying of this disease and he wants a little relief. Can you help me get medical marijuana? And I have helped them do that. And I think there's a very big need for that. My father died of lung cancer in 2007. And we did not obviously have the program in Connecticut at the time. And I watched him suffer through this. I don't know if he ever would have used medical marijuana. But people are in great pain. And if this can add some comfort to them and they have a diagnosed, clear need for it, then I support it. And so I guess what I would just say is if we are in the midst of a big epidemic when it comes to opioids, and we know we have a problem, and we know that for some people, not all people, this can be a gateway, why legalize? If we know that we've decriminalized it to the point that most people who are casual marijuana users are not going to face severe consequences that will alter their life when it comes to getting a job, holding a job, doing all the kind of things we want people to do to be successful, why legalize? And finally, if the protections are in place and the program exists to make sure that people who may have a legitimate use of marijuana for medicinal purposes can have access to that in a regulated fashion, then why legalize? And so those are the three questions that I have in my mind, and that I think my colleagues share, and we're going to have a debate about this. The last thing I would say is that the politics of this are a little weird. I'm a Democrat, Vin's a Republican, Ted's a Democrat. There are some Democrats that have opposed this. There are some Democrats that strongly support it. There are some Republicans who have come out strongly in support of this and some Republicans who are opposed. So it's not a party line issue. For a lot of us, I think it's a conscience issue. It's something that we have to feel strongly about. And the numbers, as Vin alluded to, may be against us. But for me, What I can tell you as your state representative, for many of you, that I am going to try to explore those three things. And I have an open mind, I have an open ear, and if you disagree with me, I hope you contact me, and some of you already have. But this is the dialogue that I think we need to have about those three issues and some more, and not just about revenue. So thank you very much for having us tonight.
Okay, as our state legislators have said, I want to be sure you understand what's illegal in Connecticut right now, because the opposition is not trying to strike down what's legal now. We have a strong medical marijuana law in Connecticut that's got lots of safeguards in it. I voted for it. It's a good bill. Doctors strongly supported it. And we have a decriminalization of a half an ounce or less of marijuana. So there's no criminal prosecutions for half an ounce or less. So that's what's legal now. No one's going to disturb or upset that. I do want to tell you, though, that, and legislators didn't mention it, that the bill to legalize recreational marijuana, like Colorado, in a full way, is sponsored by the leader of the Connecticut State Senate, Senator Martin Looney. That's very powerful. I sat next to him. Senator Kennedy now sits next to him. He's a very powerful leader. He carries a lot of weight. It's going to give a lot of push to the legalization and recreational use of marijuana in Connecticut. It's also going to bring in, they're computing about $60 million of tax revenue in the first year in a state that's essentially broke. So this is a very serious issue here with lots of debate on both sides. To introduce our scientific panel, Peter and Lisa, you're going to come up and, Lisa, you're going to introduce Dr. D'Souza. Great.
Thanks so much. I'd like to introduce Dr. Cyril D'Souza. He's a professor of psychiatry, director of the Schizophrenia Neuropharmacology Research Group at Yale, director of the Neurobiological Studies Unit, director of the Schizophrenia Research Clinic. Thanks so much.
So thank you for the invitation to speak today. I don't have a remote, but I have a wife. So I'm going to talk about the facts. I'm not going to talk about alternate facts. So I have a few disclosures here. I serve on the Physicians Advisory Board for Connecticut's Medical Marijuana Program, and I'd be actually quite interested in speaking with you later about the value of the program. Much of my research is funded by the National Institute of Health, and I'm also doing a study by a small company called INSYS. So the train for legalization left a long time ago. Next. Okay. And as you see over time, things have really changed, and as of December 2006, many states have legalized medical marijuana. Some states have legalized recreational marijuana, and other states are reviewing it as we speak. So why else do you need to know this? As you heard earlier, the THC content or the potency of cannabis has increased substantially. The University of Mississippi is tasked with actually testing cannabis every year since 1970. And since 1970, there's been about a 200% increase in the principal psychoactive constituent of marijuana, which is delta-9-THC, or which we refer to as THC. Next. There are a number of new products that are available that are very, very different from just plain old cannabis, including things called earwax, hash oil capsules, shatter, and BHO. These are products that have sometimes more than 10 times more THC than cannabis. So they're 10 times more potent than cannabis. Next slide. Similarly, there's another chemical constituent of cannabis called cannabidiol, which may have actually protective effects, may have anxiolytic effects, and antipsychotic effects. And the ratio over the last 20 years or so. Next slide. There are a number of new products that are available. I'm going to constantly go back to the experience in Colorado because there's an active experiment going on in Colorado which we could learn from. We could learn not to make the mistakes that have been made in Colorado. So there are edibles that are available. Next. There are products that are targeting kids, like the Klondike bar and sodas that are rich in THC content. Next slide. There are also vaping pens that contain different concentrates of THC, and you could be sitting next to someone using a vaping pen, and you would be completely ignorant of the fact that they're actually smoking or vaping marijuana, because pure THC actually doesn't have a smell. It's the terpenes or the terpenoids in cannabis that give it its aroma. And so if you have oil that's devoid of terpenoids, you won't really be able to smell it. Next slide. So what's the impact of legalization in youth from the Colorado experience? Shown here are the states that have legalized recreational medical marijuana in green, the states that have legalized medical marijuana only in red, and the states that have not legalized marijuana. The bottom line is, and I'll have this bottom line always highlighted in yellow at the bottom of the slide, that cannabis use in Colorado is the highest amongst 12 to 17-year-olds compared to the rest of the country. It's almost double the national average. Connecticut stands somewhere in between. I've shown that in yellow. Next slide. So there was an interesting study, a question posed to high schoolers. If marijuana were legal, would you be more likely to use it? And what this basically shows from their responses is that if marijuana were legal, kids would be much more likely to use marijuana. Next slide. So these are data taken from the Colorado Department of Education showing 10-year trends in expulsions and the percentage of expulsions related to marijuana. And you can see here that following commercialization shown in yellow and legalization shown in green, relative to alcohol shown in the bottom red line, there's been a substantial increase in expulsions related to cannabis. Next slide. So what are the consequences of marijuana? We know that cannabis is addictive. There's absolutely no question about it. In psychiatry, we describe cannabis as addictive because people sometimes have difficulty containing its use. They make many failed attempts to reduce the use or quit. They spend a lot of time acquiring or consuming cannabis. They have cravings and desire to use. They use despite negative consequences. Sometimes it supersedes the other activities of life. They use it sometimes in situations that are clearly dangerous, and they experience tolerance and withdrawal. So there's absolutely no question that cannabis is addictive. In fact, about 10% of people who will try cannabis will go on to develop a cannabis use disorder. This has also been robustly shown in animal studies that cannabis is addictive. Next slide. We also know that repeated exposure to cannabis can result in tolerance, dependence, and withdrawal. Shown here is data from a study that we did at Yale, where we now have the capacity to actually look at the brain's own cannabinoid receptors. And shown in the top panel is a healthy control these were data collected using positron emission tomography. And shown in the bottom panel is a daily cannabis user. And we find about a 15% reduction in brain cannabinoid receptors in someone who smokes cannabis on a daily basis. Next slide. What about the effects of cannabis on cognition? And when I say cognition, I'm referring to those mental processes that we use every day in negotiating life, things like attention, memory, decision-making, time perception, et cetera, et cetera. Shown in red are the effects of cannabis, at least the acute effects of cannabis, on on impairing things like memory, attention, etc. Next slide. What's interesting is that many of these mental functions are also critical in operating a motor vehicle. And there are at least 3 pieces of evidence that suggest that the use of cannabis can impair driving. There are studies done in the laboratory, like studies done in my laboratory, which show that cannabis or its constituent chemicals can disrupt or impair many of the critical functions involved in driving, such as attention, time perception, distance perception, etc. Then there are studies looking at the effects of cannabis and its constituents in driving simulators, and clearly there is very robust evidence showing that cannabis can impair driving. And finally, the studies that are most difficult to interpret are the field studies. But even those studies suggest that if you are smoking marijuana, you're likely, the risk of you experiencing a motor vehicle accident is almost double. Next slide. So again, going back to the data from Colorado, shown here is the percent of traffic deaths that were related to marijuana following commercialization and legalization. And hopefully you can see here that there's a robust increase following both commercialization and legalization. Next. In Colorado, actually there are billboards like this suggesting that cannabis may be a safer alternative to alcohol when you want to drive. This is really a bad message, but this is what you see in Colorado, and hopefully in Connecticut we will not make the same mistake. So what about persistent cognitive impairments? There's been a great controversy in the literature about whether repeated use of marijuana can result in persistent effects that last for years. And one of the challenges is that it's hard to tell from some of the epidemiological studies whether people had cognitive impairments prior to actually starting to use cannabis. And one very important study has helped clarify this. And this is the Dunedin study that was done in the county of Dunedin in New Zealand, where everyone born in that county in the year 1972 have been followed for the last 44 years. Next slide. What they showed in this study, next, is that they had the capacity to test children prior to using cannabis, so between the age of 7 and 13, next. Then between the age of 18 and 38, they had several assessments where they asked them about their use of cannabis, next. And finally, they tested them at age 38. So they had the capacity here to look at cognitive test performance before people started using marijuana and after they started using marijuana. And what did they find? This is a busy slide, but what this slide shows you is that if on those 3 occasions where you were asked about using marijuana and you met criteria for cannabis dependence, i.e. if you were diagnosed 1 time, 2 times, or 3 times, that is, your use of cannabis was persistent, there was a drop in IQ of about 8 points in someone who was diagnosed with using cannabis on 3 separate occasions. Next. What this translates into is an effect size of about 0.38, minus 0.38, which is, in science, we consider that a moderate effect size. So this is a moderate reduction in IQ in someone who's using cannabis on at these 3 time points. Next. These deficits that they found in the Dunedin study extended to beyond IQ. It involved memory, attention, and many other aspects of cognition, and could not be explained when they did use statistical methods to covary out the effects of alcohol and other drugs, socioeconomic status, and education. Next. Did these impairments affect everyday function? So the question is, so what if you do badly on a test? Does it really impair your function? In this study, what they asked was for family members to report on whether the people participating in the study had any obvious deficits. And they actually did report, family members reported that the person went to the grocery store, they forgot what to buy at the grocery store, or I need to remind them on lists, or they forget where they're supposed to go. So these cognitive problems were actually apparent to the naked eye of family members. Next. Are adolescents more vulnerable? Next. So shown here are these 3 time points where people were asked about whether they were cannabis dependent or not. and shown with the red bars is IQ. And those who were diagnosed on 3 separate occasions as being cannabis dependent had about an 8-point loss in IQ if they started using cannabis as adolescents. Next. So shown in red is if you started using cannabis as an adolescent. Shown in orange is if you started using cannabis as an adult. What these data are interpreted as is that adolescent cannabis exposure is associated with a greater decrease in IQ. Next. Does quitting restore function? That is to say, if you stop using marijuana, do the effects go away? And shown on the left are adults. So these are adults who started using cannabis in adulthood. And you can see that when first of all, they had very small reductions in IQ, and if they stopped, the function was restored. In contrast, next slide, in adolescence, despite stopping in adolescence, some of these IQ deficits persisted. Okay, next. So adolescent but not adult exposure is associated with persistent deficits. Okay, these data would suggest that there are perhaps some irreversible changes if you start using cannabis in adolescence. Next. So what about cannabis and psychosis? This has been the focus of my work for the last 20 or 25 years. And what we find in our laboratory is that at certain doses, cannabis can induce symptoms of psychosis. You might ask, what are symptoms of psychosis? Those include symptoms such as paranoia, hallucinations, perceptual alterations, the inability to keep one's thoughts on track, etc. So in the lab, we are able to show that at certain doses, cannabis can induce acute transient psychosis lasting for about an hour. These effects seem to be dose-dependent. People with schizophrenia seem to be more vulnerable to these effects. Family members of people with serious mental illness like schizophrenia seem to be more vulnerable. And cannabis is thought to precipitate or hasten the development of schizophrenia in those who are vulnerable. There's pretty convincing evidence now, both from that Dunedin study that I showed you, that one's risk for schizophrenia increases between 2- and 4-fold if you have been exposed to cannabis in adolescence. Next. It looks like the earlier that one is exposed, the heavier the exposure is, and the longer the exposure is, the greater the risk for both cognitive deficits and schizophrenia or psychosis-like disorders. Next. So obviously, it's going to be impossible to actually study this in humans, but one alternative is the use of animal studies. And there have been a number of animal studies that have looked at the effects of cannabis exposure at different stages of adolescence. So if you take very young animals in early, middle, late adolescence, and then in adulthood, and expose them to cannabis, what you find is that when you expose these young rats to cannabis in adolescence, and you stop giving them cannabis and look at what happens to them in adulthood, many of them have phenotypes that we in the psychiatry field consider related to psychosis. So this study and many other studies suggest again that there's a critical window of exposure. So early and mid-adolescence may be a time when exposure to cannabis and cannabinoids might actually have far-reaching implications. Next. So why are adolescents more vulnerable? We now know that the brain continues to develop until the age of 25. Brain maturation is a complicated process. In adolescence, the brain is undergoing massive changes. There's significant pruning that's going on, and the brain's own endocannabinoid system. So the brain has its own endocannabinoid system, which plays a very important role in neurodevelopment. And if that system is overactivated or activated by cannabis, one could imagine how that could perturb neurodevelopment and lead to long-lasting changes. So I just want to summarize here. I was given 20 minutes to talk. Hopefully I'm done. There are indeed acute and persistent negative consequences to marijuana. It's clear that earlier, heavier, and longer exposure is associated with greater risk, and adolescents are much more vulnerable. So I'm going to stop there. I just want to make a few comments about medical marijuana because some of our speakers had spoken about this earlier. While Connecticut has a number of safeguards, and while marijuana may indeed have medical applications, I think it's hard for me as a scientist to understand how one product could work for conditions as diverse as PTSD, ulcerative colitis, psoriasis, sickle cell anemia. There's no drug, one drug that I know of, that could work for conditions that have nothing in common with them. I think more likely, medical marijuana might be helping in some of these chronic conditions by reducing distress. I don't want to minimize that. That's important. But I don't think medical marijuana, or the evidence is really there for medical marijuana to work for the now 18 conditions that for which it's approved in the state of Connecticut. So I'm going to stop there, and I guess.
Thank you very much. Now I'm going to introduce Andy Baccaro. He's the Executive Director and founder of Project Courage, a substance abuse treatment center that provides specialized treatment for adolescents and young adults.
Thanks, Lisa. Can everybody hear?
Stand up, please.
You want to see my better side, do you? I think that's the first time I've ever gotten applause just for standing up. So Project Courage, we're over in Old Saybrook, and we treat adolescent and young adult substance abuse or individuals struggling with substance abuse disorders. So 70% of the clients that come through Project Courage indicate that pot is a preferred substance for them to use. And that's pretty much in line with national data too. It's been a while now that organizations like NIDA and National Institute of Health have put out that it's the most commonly abused illicit substance. And so what we see over there is really two clients. A client that is primarily going to be smoking pot and really isn't interested in anything else, and a client that maybe started smoking pot, moved on to other things, and is maybe settling back into pot. They've gotten beaten up a little bit. And they like to do the marijuana maintenance program. And so for those clients, whether they're primarily using pot or they're coming back around to it, one of the things that's a big challenge for them is the idea that there really isn't a problem. And we hear the vernacular is that it's not a drug. I mean, that's the literal words that'll be used. I was doing coke, I was doing heroin, I was doing drugs. But pot's not really a drug. And so that's the work, right, is trying to help create that awareness. And I think there's a lot of reasons that contribute to that. Culturally, scientifically, there's a bunch of ways we can look at, well, why is that? Why have so many of us kind of gotten to that point? It's not just people who use substances, it's all of us have kind of gotten to that point. Well, is it even really a drug anymore? And we could talk all night about that. I just want to focus on one part, and one part really, for me, is the idea of the consequences. And I think when you look at pot and you compare it to other drugs, in a lot of ways, not in all ways, I know people can get upset about this, but in a lot of ways, the consequences are different in their acuity and the duration, okay? If I'm going to go out and smoke crack or IV heroin use or drink alcohol on a pretty regular basis, I probably have 3 to 5 years. 3 to 5 years before I end up locked up, or a spouse is threatening to leave me, or I'm losing my job, or I'm in treatment, or God forbid I overdose. But after 3 to 5 years, some significant life event is going to emerge. It's going to force me to take a hard look at the choices I'm making around substance use. So it's a rapid onset, relatively speaking, with pretty acute outcomes. It's different with pot. Those things can certainly happen, right? We see a 16-year-old that gets high for the first time and has a panic attack and gets hospitalized. But for a lot of those individuals smoking pot, the acuity and the rapid onset isn't there, right? So it's a subtle thing that emerges over time. And so for a lot of people, they make from there, you can see it's not a big leap to say, well, yeah, that explains it then. And that's why it's not really a drug in comparison to those real drugs. But I think you can make the argument in a lot of ways too, that just the contrary, that because it's such a subtle, slow process, that it's outside of our awareness. So would you rather have a rapid decline with the ability to rebuild your life, or something that happens so slowly over a period of time that it's almost outside of your awareness, so that even if change is possible, you might not even see it happen, and a decade or two goes by. And at that point, you're trapped. So let me give some examples, right? Because that can all sound a bit overdramatic, but how we see that play out. I think, for doing this for 20 years, you just hear a lot of stories and a lot of examples of how that will reflect that process. A classic one we'll hear from a lot of the kids we see, and I'm going to talk about this more with an adolescent flavor, is the idea that I borrow money. I borrow money from my parents so I can get high, right? So it's Friday night, and I tell my mom, hey, I need $20. We're going to the movies tonight. I get the $20, I get in the car, and I throw it in to pitch in to get a bag of pot so we can get high, right? And then I do that the next weekend because I need $20 for the football game, and the next weekend because I'm going to the mall or whatever. It's a lot different, right, than if I raid my mom's jewelry box, bring it down to the pawn shop. That's a lot harder to talk about. That's borrowing, right, that I'm not stealing. But $20, a little bit over time, doesn't do a lot to the conscious, right? So what about the idea of risk-taking? If you look at anybody that smoked pot, and anybody that smoked pot in this room, you'll be able to relate to this. The first time people get high, there'll be two, if not all three of these precautions in place, right? They're gonna go somewhere safe. They'll go to the woods, they'll go to a friend's house whose parents get high, they'll go to a friend's house whose parents are oblivious or never home. They'll go with somebody they trust, often a good friend or a sibling, and they'll go with somebody that's gotten high before. And why are they doing those things? Because they're precautions, because they know they're about to take a risk. That's not conscious, though. That's outside of awareness. They're not whipping out a little checklist. I'm somewhere safe. I'm in the woods. It's a good time to get high. They're not even aware of what they're doing. Now let's fast forward that to the 30th time. Now I'm upstairs in my room. My parents are downstairs making dinner. I have a towel under the door. It's the middle of the winter. I've got a fan blowing out the window so I can blow my hitters out the window because it's too cold to go outside at this point. It's a buzzkill to get high in the winter outside. And, having dinner with my parents is kind of awkward, so I'd rather just be high, right? There's a lot of steps that had to happen there for those things to be okay that I'm not even fully aware of. Then there's the idea of impaired control. So after school, I tell myself, I'm just going to smoke one bowl today. That's it. Just pack one bowl. You could plug in any variety of reasons. Maybe it's because I've been really behind in my work and I got to get caught up. Maybe it's because I'm going to see my mom at 5 o'clock and she busted me last week already, and if she sees me in this condition again, I'm going to get in more trouble. Whatever it is, but I tell myself just one bowl and that's it. 3 or 4 hours go by, 3 or 4 hours of getting high. I clam baked my car. Doesn't really matter, right? The idea of ensuring my supply, right? That's a big one for a lot of people who smoke pot. We don't like to admit that one. Right? But I've got enough pot in my pocket to get me high. Maybe enough for me and my friend to get high. And at the end of the night, when my good friend says, hey, you holding anything? You got any pot? I'm going to, without even being aware of it, shake my head no, because that needs to come home with me so that I can get baked just enough so I can go to bed that night. So there's a lot of ways, right? There's the idea of what becomes fun. The idea that, hey, I could go out tonight on a date, but if I get baked, it's going to be even better. I could go to the movies tonight, but if I get baked, it's going to be even better. I could go to McDonald's, but God, if I get baked, it's going to be a lot better, right? We don't really realize what's happening as we just start to redefine what fun is. Somewhere along the line, we slip over the threshold that the inverse becomes true. I'm not okay unless I'm high. It's not about being fun anymore, but that's the way it plays out. I think with pot, too, we experience the notion of craving as a whisper. It's a cajoling, kind of charming old buddy that says, look, come on, man, you've had a long day. Screw those people. Let's just unwind. It's not a desperate scream like a crack cocaine craving or a heroin addiction craving. So ultimately, I'm with the same people in the same place at the same times every day doing the same things. And now, I don't mean to sound pejorative or judgmental because it's not at all. What's happened here is this is about regulation. This is about I found a way to regulate. I found a way to regulate my security, my choices, my relationships, my ability to sleep or not. But when we talk about things like self-regulation, that's not really that sexy, right? That's not Miami Vice. It's not gunshots and drug deals and back alleys and cartels and the things that are obvious, that are obnoxious, that really have no way of us becoming completely ambivalent about. Self-regulation's kind of boring. We don't really see it as a big issue. But that's really what people find when they're smoking pot on a regular basis. And because that's what it is, they're going to defend it fiercely. We're going to hear about the fact about how much worse alcohol is. We're going to hear about the fact that it's natural, that it's a plant, that it's holistic. We're going to hear about the fact that many of our forefathers smoked it. All of which may be true, but those are all smoke screens for the bottom line that I found something that's helped me manage distress. And I think that's the issue. I think really if we talk about as a culture how we manage that idea of self-regulation in this country, the model we set for young people of how to regulate your discomfort and your distress, whether you're the anxious adolescent that can't tolerate boredom, or the adult with low frustration tolerance. I think if we started to talk about the idea of self-regulation, we probably wouldn't be up here talking about the idea of legalizing marijuana, let alone the fallout in the wake of the war on drugs, opioid epidemics. So that's my take on it. Thanks for letting me share, guys.
So before we have our next speaker come up, I'd like everyone in this room, just take a minute and think about this. All the professional people that have shared their message in this room, our local politicians, our next speaker is, in my opinion, going to speak from something that a lot of us don't have anymore is youth. And a lot of us don't listen to that much anymore either. And I think it's a really important message. Gabby wasn't handed a script. This is something that she wrote. This is something that we feel the majority of the youth in our community feel about this issue. Gabby Palumbo.
Good evening. Can everyone hear me? Yeah, okay. I am Gabrielle Palumbo, and I am a proud representative for Guilford Day. Tonight you have heard from respectable representatives and members of Connecticut about their stance and beliefs on the legalization of marijuana. In addition, I believe that it is important to hear from a youth perspective. I am a junior at the Guilford High School. I'm in classes with students ranging from ages 14 through 18. I hear many stories about wild parties and countless pictures of marijuana on social media. However, thanks to the internet, so can everyone else, including young kids who are unaware of the harm. As a sister to 5 siblings, 4 which are younger, I am concerned for their future along with mine. I think that the legalization of marijuana will send the wrong message to the youth in Connecticut. During the years of growing up, kids look up to adults as their role models and protectors. Therefore, it is up to adults and young adults to set an example for the youth. The legalization of marijuana will have a huge impact on the youth. In my opinion, a harmful one. The data we have collected over the years already show that youth members believe that marijuana is less harmful than cigarettes. This view will only increase amongst the youth as marijuana becomes more acceptable in our society. Increase amongst the youth as marijuana becomes more acceptable in our society. With being a youth myself, I know firsthand that if marijuana is legalized, there will be a rapid growth in the usage of this drug, not only in the high school, but in younger grade schools. Although a great number of those kids will perhaps even ignore the warnings about the health effects, because in our eyes, if adult can do it, so can we. I do wonder how our community will change if marijuana is legalized. It would be hypocritical of an adult to press the concern of the use of this drug, yet have it be legalized. This topic is a great concern for me. I want to be able to live in a community that is working towards a better interest in the health and well-being of its members, and I just can't see that if marijuana is accepted. I, along with many others, are concerned, and I hope you take time to think about the message this decision will be sending. Thank you.
Any questions? Anybody like to come up and ask a question to any of the panelists?
My name is Glenna MacDonald. My parents fell in love in Bishop's Barn dance over 60 years ago. Ed said already, the stroke of the pen, that there's medical marijuana. And the doctor, wherever he is, from Sri Lanka, he said that the THC levels have gone up. That's like beer to hard whiskey. I also have something written that I'd like to read. Ted said there's a lot of controversy, and for what I hear from Sean, he's sick and tired of burying the children, and I'm getting a little sick of hearing it myself. Now, I'm from the Scotticoke Indian tribe in Kent, Connecticut, on my mother's side, and my dad was from the Highlands of Scotland. And our last name means Lord, and Jesus is the Lord of Lords and the King of Kings. Genesis chapter 1, if I can find it, 26. Then God said, no, that's not it. It's 29. Okay. And God said, see, I have given you every herb that yields seed, which I believe marijuana does, which is on the face of the earth, and every tree whose fruit yields seed, to you it shall be given to you for food. Now, there's another reason I want to read this from the Proverbs. King Solomon, the wisest of kings. Proverbs 31. Okay. It is not for kings, O Lemuel. It is not for kings to drink wine, nor for princes intoxicating drink, lest they drink and forget the law, and pervert justice of all its effect. Give strong drink to him who is perishing. That would be mercy. And wine to those who are bitter of heart. Let him drink and forget his poverty. and remember his misery no more. I do not know about legislation. As for me, I've been in terrible pain. I was in a terrible accident, life starred, 20 years ago, and I never asked a doctor for any medical marijuana or any of that. I'll take an aspirin here and there. And as far as the legislation goes, they are appointed, elected officials to keep us safe. I don't want to hear about it anymore. And don't bring anything around. I'll take you for a cemetery ride and tell you a few stories. I'm 60 years old. Enough. And I can't believe that we have to compete and use Colorado for a guinea pig when we have our own brains. We can't decide, should we take this high THC stuff? Or should we let the kings and the rulers drink? In the book of Timothy, Paul told Timothy when he was instructing him, stop drinking so much water and have a little wine.
Hi, my name is Vasilis Vasiliou. I live here in Guilford and I work at Yale. I'm the chair of Environmental Health Sciences. But I came from Colorado. I was for 18 years in the School of Pharmacy, Department of Pharmaceutical Sciences. I'm a toxicologist. And I have to tell you something. When the issues with marijuana came up in Colorado and we were trying to say something, everybody was saying, well, it will be safer than alcohol. I want to point a few things to you in addition to what you heard from the experts here. One is the apathy that is associated with marijuana users. You see those kids full of energy, full of dreams. They start smoking marijuana and then they're kind of laid off and it's all right. I can miss a class. I can have another glass of wine. I can have a drink. But one of the things that I want to draw your attention to is, and nobody is really pay a lot of attention, is the interaction between alcohol and marijuana. This is something that the legislation should take into account, they should really be aware of. 25 years ago, we published a paper that THC inhibits the ethanol detoxification processes in both liver and brain. That was in rats. As I said, that's what 25 years ago. If you look at the Dutch Department of Public Transportation, they just published last year that if you have a drink and your blood alcohol levels are 0.04%, and then depending on how much marijuana you use, your driving impairment equals to almost 3 or 4 times blood alcohol levels. So, in other words, very simple. You have a drink, you think you're legal. You actually may bypass the breathalyzer, but then you have the marijuana, and then you drive, and you're like a drunk. So, if you saw the results of the increased traffic with marijuana, is because even if you measure the blood alcohol levels from these individuals, you're not going to find it. But in the brain, that's what it happens, and you have the multiple effects. So really, the recreational has to be taken into account very carefully. You know, there are a lot of dangers that we do not appreciate. And also I want to say, even medical marijuana, you know, I saw JAMA just published one of the most prestigious journals, published in December of 2016. They're trying to place now marijuana for morning sickness, for God's sakes, in pregnant women. It is very well known, you heard it, how much it affects the brain, of the developing of the brain, and especially, and just other things. Secondhand smoker, pregnant women, they're going to be exposed to. Those kids, what's going to happen to those kids? All right? That's all. Thank you very much.
I'm Bo Hune, a member of DAY, and I'm speaking for a friend of mine, Wayne Jarvis, who runs the Lifelinks Sober House here in Guilford and in Madison. Wayne's the executive director. He was sick, very sick yesterday in the emergency room, and he sent an email to me asking me to speak for him. He's very concerned about the impact of legalization on the kids in town. He said it's without question for me and most of my clients, marijuana was a gateway drug, the gateway to experimenting with other equally, if not more harmful substances such as cocaine and opiates. It is for many the first step toward habitual drug use, personal loss, and it devastates families and individuals. My concern is primarily for young people whose not fully developed brains and developmental processes can be irreparably harmed and interrupted. Their growth, health, cognition, and future wellness and prosperity are all at risk. Thanks very much.
Hello, everybody. My name is Attorney Zachary Lawrence. I'm licensed in the state and federal courts of Connecticut, and obviously I'm primarily concerned about the legal aspect of this issue, and that's why I've come here today. The state of Connecticut decriminalized marijuana about 3 years ago, and I think that is definitely progress in the right direction. I wholly advocate full legalization of marijuana in the state of Connecticut for mainly the same reasons that Colorado, Washington, California, and Massachusetts have. Under a decriminalized regime, basically the legislature has implicitly acknowledged the fact that we as a society differentiate marijuana from hard drugs. I think that if we are able to draw that stark line there, we are acknowledging that this is not something worth ruining people's lives over, because that is what happens when you get a criminal record. In many states, when you have a felony, you cannot vote. I think that we would have seen a lot of different election results in a lot of states where people who have lost their right to vote because of something as silly as a marijuana conviction from when they were 18 years old. Also, we heard some talk today here about children's usage, kids using it, teenagers. Now, obviously, nobody is advocating the use of marijuana among young people. We're talking about policy for adults. And policy for adults should not be based on what could possibly happen with children. However, I would put forward that legalization would help prevent teenagers from getting marijuana. Why would this be? Well, when you go into a liquor store, the store owner asks the teenager for identification. Drug dealers don't care about identification, and they would be happy to sell it to whoever is willing to buy it. Furthermore, in countries such as Netherlands, Switzerland, Italy, Portugal, countries that have a more regulated regime, we find that teenagers actually have a much lower rate of use than here in the United States, and that's because it is not risque, it is not the forbidden fruit that it is among teenagers here. I think that if we stop making it into such a big deal, then perhaps we would see some progress in that regards. And who are the people who are against this? In Massachusetts, this past election, they voted for it. The biggest lobbying groups against legalization were the corrections lobbyists as well as the liquor lobbyists. Why is that? Because obviously they would see a loss of business as a result of legalization. Pharmaceutical companies, well, listen, I thought medical marijuana, and I'll come clean, I thought medical marijuana was kind of a nonsense thing when California first did it in '96. I thought it was basically a backdoor way to get to legalization. I think since then we have found that it has myriad uses for medical purposes, specifically with regards to nausea, people with wasting syndrome who have AIDS, cancer, and are unable to eat. Well, if you think about it logically, what is the big stereotype among stoners, right? Munchies, right? That's the big, well, what is that for? People who have wasting syndrome, diseases, trouble eating, it helps stimulate appetite, they're able to get rid of nausea and so forth. I just kind of wrote down a few different things here. Representative Scanlon, I believe, mentioned the issue of race. I think race, of course, is one of those things that cannot be ignored in a society. Growing up as a young white male in Guilford, Connecticut, I did not exactly have many run-ins with police that were negative. However, I can tell you that many of my darker-skinned friends have. It's just a fact of the matter of the world that we live in. And with regards to, I heard some comments with the issue with management of stress, boredom, drug addiction, so forth. Just because something may have some negative effects, some pharmacological effects, that doesn't mean that we should handle it through the criminal justice system. We should treat it as a public health issue. People should not be going to jail. People should not be losing their children. If you are an adult who minds your business in your own home and you smoke a joint and watch Rachel Maddow, I don't know who you're bothering. But if DCF finds out about that, they can come and take your kids away from you. You can lose your job. You can lose up to about 400 different government programs, including food stamps, Section 8 housing, student loans for college. We literally are ruining people's lives with a criminal regime. And I think it is great that Connecticut has moved forward towards decriminalization. We should take that extra step, legalize it, regulate it, raise money for the general treasury, earmark it for public health causes such as drug addiction and drug education. Maybe some of it can even go to things like public schools and roads. And we would also not have that opportunity cost of spending money on law enforcement, prisons, which are packed to the brim, courts, lawyers, judges. All of these things cost money. And lastly, I just want to say, take it into comparison to alcohol. When we re-legalized alcohol after Prohibition, nobody was worried about having a society full of drunkards, right? But I think we all know somebody who probably has an unhealthy relationship with alcohol. And what do? We get them to AA meetings. We treat it in more public health acceptable ways. We don't destroy their lives and put them in prison. And lastly, there are preliminary studies that are coming out of these states, such as Colorado and Washington, that show some beneficial effects. The issue of opioid addiction is very serious. In Colorado, they have seen overdoses starting to go down, and that is a similar pattern that's existed in every state that has medical marijuana, because these doctors just hand out OxyContin and Percocets like they're candy. But in these states with medical marijuana, they have a safer alternative and don't get the addictions to opioids. I'll just wrap it up right now.
Who's your client?
I'm sorry, what's that?
Who's your client? You didn't mention that.
I'm sorry.
Who are you representing?
I'm not representing anybody. I'm here on my own volition. But anyway, I could go on for an hour. I have limited time. I want to give the floor to other people, and I'd be happy to answer questions. I did work for the Yale School of Public Health before law school, and my senior thesis that got me into law school was also on Fourth and Fifth Amendment rights, on how they've been compromised by marijuana prohibition. Thank you.
So I'm excited to see so many people have something to say. It is 8:20. I've just asked to kind of keep what you have to say a little brief and open up for other people.
Hello, my name is Zach Neer. I've been a resident of Guilford all 25 years of my life. Frankly, I have a very speckled relationship with marijuana. It plagued me in my youth, disallowed me to continue in my sports, got in the way of my schooling, and for quite some time I was strongly against it. It wasn't until about a few years ago, after a cancer diagnosis, that I found the benefits of cannabis as medicine. After traveling around the country and learning about it as a medicinal component to helping overcome the illness, I decided to take on this as a personal cause, if you will. I started Zach Attacks Cancer as a foundation to help educate the population about what cannabis really is. What I heard tonight, which was wonderful, from one of our legislative representatives, is that education is our primary focus. There is a good amount of misinformation out there about the cannabis plant. One thing I haven't heard tonight is the term re. Everyone is saying legalization. This would in turn be the re-legalization. We've had 161 years of very strong cannabis influence on our culture. Only 80 years has it been illegal, and there has been some benefit, and there's been a lot of detriment. A few things I'd like to address. I heard we can't be emotional about this, and I think that's very accurate. I think we need to stick to the science. It's also hard to hear that we don't want to be emotional, yet statements like we don't want a stoner-filled society. That is an emotionally invoking statement. Thinking about the 900 children who have died from opiates is emotionally invoking statement. I don't directly see the correlation, but again, that is my own. I agree with the gentleman who spoke directly before me that if you go to a liquor store, they'll ask for your identification, sell you the alcohol. They won't in turn ask you if you'd also like to go out back and buy cocaine. I have had cannabis dealers who in the black market have offered me much more potent substances. So I do believe that if we legalize cannabis, that would disallow our youth to access it. Being in high school, I had much more easy access to finding cannabis than I did alcohol. Briefly, I'd like to touch on the medical components, if I may. Something I heard by the gentleman to the left of me. How can this plant be so beneficial to such a wide array of illnesses? There are over 120 different types of cannabinoids, 16 different types of THC alone. So I would say it's very beneficial to so many different illnesses because there are so many different molecules in the plant, some of which work synergistically, others work better, if isolated. Interesting thing I'd like to also add about cannabis law in this country. We were actually legally obliged to grow it. That was the first law that was ever applied to the citizens of this country. If we had more than 10 acres, we were forced to grow hemp to donate back to the government, sailing rope, such. Another thing that was stated in the medical presentation is that plants are producing significantly more THC than they used to. That is accurate, but there is also the other side of that. With the breeding of plants and crossbreeding, people are allowed to produce THC or CBD, cannabidiol. There are plants that produce little to no THC, which is incredibly beneficial for someone, in my case, a cancer patient, someone with severe spastic disorders. So in conclusion, this would bring me back to the gentleman, and forgive, I don't remember who said it, but education is our number one goal here. Taxes aside, what it will do to help ease of access for medical patients, how this will allow research to permeate the society a little bit better. They're all benefits, but I think first and foremost we need to be educated. I think it's very important that we don't allow our emotional selves or personal experiences to get in the way of what is frankly best for the state. Thank you.
Hi, excuse me. My question is for Dr. Deepak. I was wondering if you could comment on the Wall Street Journal article pertaining to your company, INSYS, about your former CEO taking millions of dollars of kickbacks from the fentanyl companies.
Sorry, it's not my company. I don't work for INSYS. I work for Yale University and the VA hospital. I have no financial stake in any of those companies. But what we are doing is trying to generate the kind of evidence that we would need to make the kind of public health policy decisions. So if there's a claim, for example, that cannabidiol, which is one of the constituents of cannabis, works for condition X, then the way to answer that question is to do a double-blind, placebo-controlled study. That's what we're doing. So I'm interested in the evidence. I'm not interested in,
But you did say you were affiliated with INSYS.
No, I'm not affiliated with anyone.
It was on your...
Yeah, I'm doing a study where INSYS is giving us the CBD to actually do the study, but I don't get any personal profit from that. It's a study that's being done through Yale University.
Okay. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cody Roberts. I've been a resident of Connecticut all my life. A little background history on my life. My parents got divorced when I was in middle school, which, leaves you a pretty troubled student. My mother, single at the time. My parents got divorced, so she didn't really know what to do with me. I was a little crazy, a little rambunctious, pretty animated, energetic kind of kid, very passionate. So she did whatever, the doctors told her to. Feed me Ritalin. Feed me Adderall. So I started taking Adderall. They started obviously overprescribing me anything I'd say. Kind of feel zombie-ish. Don't really feel myself. Oh, you need to take more. Take more. Take more. So quickly, I've became quite the addict. Started doing over 22 Xanax bars a day for well over 2.5 years, 3 years at the age of 17. In 2009, I ended up landing myself in jail and which I ended up overdosing in jail. They found me pretty much dead. They took me out. I was begging for help. Since you beg for help in jail, they got to get you help. Sent me to rehab. Went to rehab. Rehab, man, that's a crazy story. Rehab is good. I would suggest it for anybody if you truly want the help. Really, addiction comes down to yourself. It's your disease only. You control it. If you want to stop it, you will stop it, plain and simple. Rehab is a guidance. Also shows you a lot of nasty stuff, a lot of nasty people, and a lot of drug use too. Saw a lot of drug use in my rehab. Well, fast forward a little bit. I later found out after doing research that Adderall is one molecule off of methamphetamine, which is crystal meth. So they were basically feeding me meth my whole entire childhood. So how could I not be an addict? Now, I don't really put any blame on my mother or pharmaceutical companies or anything, you know, it's just kind of product of environment, it's kind of our society, we're kind of driven by profit, and you know, pills and sickness is pretty good profit. So with that being said, I found cannabis. Where to start? I can almost cry right now. If it wasn't for cannabis, I would not be alive today. Cannabis helped found so much relief in my life, took away all my anxiety, all away my pain. I suffer from severe nerve damage up and down my spinal cord due to football and car accidents. Yes, I use cannabis every day. I've been using it since I was 15 years old. Now, when I was 15 through high school while using other drugs, I did not see any medicinal value in it. I was just using it to get high. I will say alcohol had a big effect in my other use of drugs as well. I started experimenting because I was drunk and I was like, hey, let's try something else, you know? But yeah, so when I started using cannabis more as a recreational, not as a recreational, more as a medicinal at the age of 18 when I started doing more research, got a little more brain on my head. I found a lot of amazing articles by a lot of well-known doctors, like, for instance, Dr. Raphael Mechoulam, who is responsible for discovering the endocannabinoid system, which all of us in here have, is a big idol of mine. Yeah, so I've learned there's a lot of medicinal value with cannabis, so I started experimenting, learning more about it, using it frequently every day, and I have seen tremendous results. And I'm so proud of this plant and so blessed for this plant, and I will continue to fight till the day I die until this plant is free and everybody can have access to it, because it is such an amazing plant. And with that being said, just wanted to share my little story real quick. I do have one question for the legislators, if you guys don't mind. According to all available scientific studies, teen use has not gone up in states that have legalized adult use. So do you think Connecticut would be less capable of enforcing this law? Thank you, guys.
I disagree with that premise.
What was that, sir?
I disagree with that premise. We have seen an uptick in the use of marijuana among youth where it's been legalized. And I think even internally in the state of Connecticut, we've had studies come out where children now in schools have a different perception and are utilizing marijuana at a younger age now because of the medical marijuana program. But having said that, that program exists, it is where it is. But I don't think it's an appropriate statement to say that the youth have not increased their usage of marijuana, because in fact it is occurring. And we just saw that data up here today, where Colorado's usage is double the national average.
Yes, sir.
It's with great pride I can stand here tonight and tell you I'm an American, and I'm very proud of it. My name is Rick Parmley, and I live in Durham. We've heard some wonderful speakers here tonight, and I'm very grateful that our representatives and others that put this program together was very informative. My father-in-law was a physician. My father was an attorney. I have no legal or medical training. One thing that hasn't come up this evening, I don't believe, is this is against federal law. So if you want to use these things, and you consider it, that you're using the term very loosely when you say you legalize it, state law does not surpass federal law at all. It never has, never will. And as far as the record of using drugs following you, I have a commercial license, and We have a couple of Guilford's finest here. Good evening. If they give me a citation tonight, it'll follow me, and my insurance company will reward me with higher premiums, and it will affect my job rating, et cetera. The other thing I can say is, and I say this carefully, because it could be cut off and misinterpreted. But I have 2 sons into drugs. I say that with pride. One's a sales manager for a pharmaceutical company. My other son works for Homeland Security and Drug Enforcement. I do not support these efforts. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Michael Abdondolo. I'm from Madison, and I'm a student at Southern Connecticut State University. And I just had a couple points of mine that I wanted to bring up. That there's a lot of talk about higher THC levels now, within the past few decades. And I want to make the point that this has occurred without it being legal. So in an unregulated market, there is no test for, level of THC or level of CBD. So when someone's buying on the street, they don't really have an option, in terms of choice. So all this has occurred despite it being illegal. And compare it to states like here where it's medically legal and states where it's fully legal, like Colorado, there are actually percentages of THC and CBD, so users can choose the strain that best works for them. And they actually have knowledge about what they're ingesting in their body. Similar to when you go to a liquor store, you know the proof and the percentage of alcohol in the alcohol you're buying. It's not a mystery. It's known because it's regulated. And a further note on regulation, it's kind of strange that it's okay, the state's saying it's okay, that it's decriminalized, but we don't want to profit off it. We want to keep the profit in the unregulated market. So it's just a strange gray area that the state's in right now. And given the financial difficulties of the state, I don't understand why they don't want to reap the tax benefits that would come from legalized use when there are legalized cigarettes, alcohol, and gambling in this state that the state enjoys, reaping the benefits of, rightfully so. So it just doesn't really make sense to me, the double standard on that. So I hope people think critically about this issue, and I want to thank you guys for having this panel and this discussion today. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Julian Canto. I grew up in Guilford, Connecticut. Lived here a good majority of my life. I had the rare chance to vote in the 2012 election in Colorado and see actually the legalization of marijuana on the ballot. It's a very important part. I could say without marijuana, I probably would not be speaking here today. So in that respect, marijuana has brought me to public speaking, public forums, and open discussion of political value. Furthermore, my question is, how do you differentiate the value that leads, or that marijuana leads to enhancing someone's self that they see in marijuana, while they still maintain an uplifting value to the social leviathan and keep making positive contributions to the community and the world around it? How do you differentiate that value, and how could you bring harm to them and make that more difficult for people to achieve that? Is that a question?
I think he was asking a question. Does anybody have an answer they'd like to respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll make a general statement. I think in Connecticut, we've tried to sort of address this issue and recognize that the usage of drugs and how they should be treated in society. And so when Connecticut decriminalized marijuana, I think there was a recognition that there are people out there that is using the drugs. From a scientific standpoint, as we're hearing tonight, we're not sure what the actual effects are on the body physically and also on the brain. So having said that, I think people are much more tepid about allowing recreational use of marijuana on a statewide policy basis. However, the decriminalization, I think, has taken away the element for individuals, so if people are going to use it, there's not severe consequences to that use. But just one point in this debate about the whole marijuana legalization, there's a presumption here that there's a regulation that we're going to regulate the market. That's not necessarily what the legislation does. For instance, the bill that's put in by Senator Looney is broad and open-ended, which would allow for people to possess, grow, and bring into the state. So there isn't sort of a market where we have THC levels that are controlled and people know what they're buying and what they're using. It doesn't eviscerate the black market. It still will be there. If we're going to try to regulate it, good luck. I mean, that's something we could look at, but I think we're seeing in the medical marijuana industry in Connecticut, the regulations are a little bit difficult to deal with. Anecdotally, we're hearing people are going in, purchasing the marijuana, divide it in half, they sell half of it to somebody to support their usage, and then they're using the other half. So there's a lot of other issues that go along with the legalization process, and whether or not we can even regulate it. And I think that's why it's sort of tepidly being handled in Hartford. There is a representative who's a Republican who's put in a bill that's much more detail-oriented, trying to have the Department of Consumer Protection regulate the process. But I think we all just shouldn't assume that it's going to be this nice, neat mirror image of the medical marijuana program. It could take on a very different life, and I think that's why we're seeing some delays in Massachusetts with the implementation.
All right, so just a follow-up question. Well, basically, the law in Colorado, as it stated on the ballot, was that it would be enforced and followed like alcohol. So being the negative, I'm not a doctor, but I've been made aware of physical effects of alcohol and negative ones, as there are potentially with marijuana. How could that not be regulated the same as the alcohol, which also has adverse effects? Thank you.
Well, yeah, and it's a good point, and there's two different markets, and it's something that we're always grappling with in Hartford.
We're running a little behind. We still have more people that'd like to say something. Again, I'd just like to remind the audience, one of the biggest reasons why we're here is to talk about this from the standpoint of our youth, okay? Of what is their perspective or perception on this for their lives and how it could potentially affect them, not making an argument on medical marijuana or how it's helped other people's lives. So again, mostly for this is about our youth and our community.
Hi, Owen Charles, Shoreline Green Party, and I'm here because I think this is, as the lawyer stated, who spoke much earlier on, a public health issue, not a criminal issue and not a legal issue. Connecticut has a history of not being paternalistic in its laws. We don't have motorcycle helmet laws here, if anyone's noticed. This is a law that is unnecessarily interfering with the rights of individuals. And now, if you look back over time, there is an abundance of information. Let me just back up for a second. So I would say one of the reasons why I joined the Green Party is because I'm a recovering Democrat. The Green Party is the only party that is for legalization of marijuana and not addicted to corporate money. Anyone who is supporting Bernie Sanders in this last election might know what I'm talking about. This is an important issue, and I think the Green Party is able to represent youth, particularly on this issue, because they are not held by corporate party interests. So let me go on to say that with regards to youth, I think it's important to look at this as a public health issue. I think the social costs of alcohol, the proven physical addiction of alcohol, the comparative literature that exists comparing alcohol to marijuana is abundant. And it has been for not just the last 10 years, for 50 years. Being up here and hearing the abundance of, I know this was pointedly against marijuana, but to hear a dearth of balanced information or omission of information we can talk about not making it emotional and having it evidence-based, but if you leave out some important things, like when you talk about marijuana addictiveness, and you don't mention the fact that it's not physically addicting, but it is psychologically addicting.
Listen,
Yeah.
that's absolute rubbish. Absolute rubbish. There is very convincing data both in animals and in humans that there's a well-described cannabis withdrawal syndrome. You get a withdrawal syndrome only if there's adaptation, dependence, and tolerance.
And has
that's now recognized.
Double-blind human studies?
That's double-blind human studies. When people quit or try to quit marijuana use and they're dependent on it, they experience the following withdrawal syndromes. They have great difficulty sleeping. If you ask anyone who smokes marijuana on a regular basis sitting here in this room, they'll tell you that one of the important reasons why they smoke marijuana right before they go to bed is because without it, they cannot sleep. So that's one. Second is their mood disturbances. People become irritable, become cranky when they quit. We've done studies at Yale where we've taken daily users of cannabis, hospitalized them on the unit, and asked them open-ended questionnaires about how they feel when they quit. There's absolutely no doubt that there's a withdrawal syndrome that can be shown very reliably even in animals. If you take animals and you make them dependent on cannabinoids, and then you abruptly stop them, those animals will show clear signs of a cannabis withdrawal syndrome. So I completely disagree with you that there's no scientific evidence about
I
this.
think it's important to, when we cite scientific evidence, to look at the wealth of the span of scientific evidence. And I'm only talking about scientific evidence. I don't want to go into pseudoscience or anything that's emotional, but I want to talk about the abundance of evidence that shows that the social cost of marijuana, the percentage of addictiveness, the effects of addictiveness are much, much, much lower than are alcohol. And that, is undeniable. Do you deny that?
Oh, so clearly the drugs have different degrees of addictiveness.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Different drugs have different degrees of addictiveness. We have addiction psychiatrists sitting here who can tell you a little more about that. But yes, is cannabis as addictive as cocaine? Absolutely. You're absolutely right.
No, okay.
But that doesn't mean it's not addictive.
Okay.
Right? The point I want to make, and the point that's often mistaken by the general public, is that cannabis is not addictive. I just want to make the point that it is addictive. Whether it is as addictive as cocaine or alcohol is a different matter, and we can have a discussion about that.
Right, okay. I guess someone else said something about, talking about kind of the worst case scenarios, what could possibly happen, with children. When we look at this law, we have to look at, not worst case scenarios, not stoners, and, you're talking about not being emotional and being evidence-based, but you have to be careful to just balance the evidence with what's out there, which science, I'm for science, okay? I'm not for these emotional arguments. And I think the social costs of alcohol, of many other addictive substances, greatly outweigh marijuana use. So I would look to, treating this as a public health issue, not as a legal issue. That's all.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Scott Cochran. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and with Madison Youth and Family Services. And this is probably going to sound more heart-heavy than head-heavy. But I find myself very concerned culturally in this country that we are very much organized around substances. And quite frankly, if we think of the alcohol regulatory system that we have in this country as the model, that model sucks. The big alcohol companies market very well and very purposefully towards youth. And if you saw one of the slides earlier that showed some of the products from Colorado, those are also very well designed at youth. So I can't see a world where this becomes legal, where these companies don't go out of their absolute way to get young people more tied to this stuff because it makes their money, it makes their profits. And all you have to do is look at the alcohol companies as a wonderful example of how that works. And to emphasize something Andy said, we really need to think about how we teach kids and raise our kids to take care of themselves and to do so in the most healthiest way that we can, and it's not through substances. Thanks.
I'm Rick Maynard, the Parks and Recreation Director here in Guilford, and I want to thank Day for organizing this event tonight. And Pete, thank you for using the term non-medicinal. That's what I'm here to talk about, just about the term recreational drugs, recreational marijuana. It's an oxymoron, and to me it's the biggest oxymoron that exists. Oxymorons are two things that are opposites, and they shouldn't go together. Recreation, by definition, is restoration of health, recreating, refreshing, giving new life. Recreation is about fitness, health, creativity, improving one's life. Non-medicinal drugs break down and destroy. Those two words should not go together. I implore our legislators, please help me with this. I have a passion about this, a mission that we got to change the term. Call it non-medicinal marijuana or non-medicinal drugs. Please don't use the word recreational marijuana, recreational drugs. They shouldn't go together. And that's my passion, to try to change the culture, the thought about that. And I appreciate it if you guys can help me with that. Thank you.
Hi, I just wanted to clarify a few points made by some of the other people making comments. Oh, make it shorter.
I didn't say that.
Let's see. First of all, the lawyer mentioned policy. We need to think about the reality. If you increase access to kids, they get into it. No question. Kids in Colorado are reporting, and I am more than happy to share the impact studies that we have. We have studies from law enforcement reports, all kinds of science, Harvard researchers, Connecticut researchers. We've got it all. We're happy to share. First of all, kids in Colorado are saying that they're getting their marijuana from friends and family and acquaintances. If it's there, they get into it. That's just the way it is. That's the way kids are. Let's see. Also, Connecticut is decriminalized. The lawyer mentioned that people's lives were getting ruined, that our prisons are full. That's hogwash. Less than well under 2% of our prison population is there for marijuana. And we have all of the studies and the statistics that show that as well. Let's see, there's a Harvard researcher, Bertha Madras. Google her. She's got all kinds of information about how kids using marijuana because of their developing brains actually increases the risk of opiate addiction. It does not help this situation. And then the other thing that I just wanted to point out is that just because marijuana is legalized, that doesn't mean the illegal market goes away. People like to pay low prices. That's why Walmart does well, kids in particular. So they're going to go where the marijuana isn't getting taxed. Cartels in Colorado are doing beautifully. I really appreciate you coming tonight. Thanks so much. And I'm happy to answer any questions anytime.
Hello. Is this heard well? I am probably the only young adolescent speaking at this time, as there were probably other people who were over the age of 18. My name is Christian Pfeiffer, and just like my classmate over there, Gabby Palumbo, I am a Guilford High School student. I moved here in 2010, lived here for almost going to be 7 years now, and all I can say firstly is that I'm very happy I made the move. I want to speak on what was spoken here today, and that this is definitely a touchy subject, and I encourage both the legislative, the doctors, and the scientific community to continue these discussions, as in this is very touchy, because much in a way, this marijuana legalization is a lot like fire, if you will, as a sort of anecdote or symbolism, in that it's very warm for people, and that it can help, it can restore, but it can also be dangerous and take and cause damage, and that can be definitely seen from what the Wonderful Day Project people have been doing, and that they've seen young people hurt by this substance. So in much of a way, it is something that's going to take a lot of discussion and a lot of revision. Am very happy to see all of the different people here, also the legislator, Sean Scanlon in the back, who I am working with on a capstone project for school, the doctor who graciously came here and shared his studies for 20 years, and both the Republican and the former senator and current Senator Ted Kennedy Jr. for sharing their own respective point of views. It's very nice to hear the different sides of each argument and how they can affect things differently. To wrap things up, I am happy about the turnout here, and whether it's on the ballot or not, the marijuana legalization, we will find and take a cautious step in seeing, is this something that's worthwhile? Is this the route to take? And maybe if it's not on the ballot this year, maybe it's on the next ballot, and then as possibly more states pass it and more scientific research comes out, it could be more of a dangerous substance or it could not be more of a dangerous substance. Thank you all and have a very good night.
Is this the one? He's a tough act to follow. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Lockery, and I work for a behavioral health treatment facility that also provides substance abuse treatment to youth. And I've been there for 25 years. And it was really helpful for me to hear the people speak tonight who are pro-marijuana use, because it has helped me to see what we've been battling against for the past 25 years. When I first began working at our agency, we would have youth coming in for evaluations and for treatment who had just begun to use. Maybe they've used for a month, 2 months, 6 months. And an outpatient level of care for someone using at that frequency and at that, that much, we were able to help them. Now, we have youth coming for treatment, presenting some of them for the first time, who have been using for years. And their communities refer to marijuana use as just marijuana use. And we can't help those kids because they have experienced so many negative consequences because of their use that they need more than outpatient treatment. And the reality is, in our state, good luck finding a level of care for substance abuse treatment for adolescents that's beyond outpatient treatment. So this is a tough battle because, as we've heard, there are some people who really believe that their marijuana use has helped them. And we're not to say that it hasn't, but I would suggest to those of you who think that it has, that should you ever get to a point in your life where you can live without it, you will do far better.
Hi, I'm David Malillo, and I'm a member of DAY, and I'm also the end of tonight's proceedings. A lot of things are crossing my mind. A lot of people came up here tonight and with all sincerity expressed what marijuana has done for them, some of them feeling it saved their lives. I can be a bit skeptical, but I wish you the best. But that's not how we decide public health policy. Public health policy is done by research and not the alternate research that gets done and thrown out to show the positives of marijuana, but the research that gets done at the Mayo Clinic, at Yale, in the medical journals. That's the research that I would base public policy upon, not individual issues and experience and questionable research institutes, who may very well get their funding from the pro-marijuana caucus. And the profit behind the marijuana industry, the profit motive, is something that didn't get mentioned tonight, and it will go unmentioned. I'll just end with one thing that hasn't been brought up. You saw on the slide the soda pop bottles, the gummy beer marijuana, all those sorts of things. That was in Colorado with medical marijuana. That wasn't even recreational. There was the most juvenile advertising, really, you could imagine. When this becomes legal, and becomes a Madison Avenue event. They are going to sell with everything it takes to sell everybody, and they're going to be likely to avoid the law like the tobacco industry did, and they're going to target kids like the tobacco industry did and the alcohol industry does. So I think beyond all of the information you heard tonight, advertised marijuana is a problem over and above recreational marijuana itself. Thank you all for coming out here tonight.